I'm Lori Perez. You are watching The Real Story. Connecticut's state treasurer and Connecticut Republicans are at odds over what the state's cash balances are and what that means. It's an important point because both say the other's position is misleading and could have consequences in the long run. Our first guest, Representative Candelora, was the original author of the legislation requiring cash flow reporting. Also joining us is Christine Stewart of CTNewsJunkie.com. Thanks both of you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Representative Candelora, if you could just kind of set the scene for the disagreement. I know you have concerns because the state treasurer used money from the state's capital programs, so she transferred some bond funds to help pay for operating expenses, and you have a problem with that.
Generally, we have a common cash pool, so all our money is pooled into one bank account, if you will. It is acceptable for the treasurer at times to borrow from bond proceeds in order to operate our government. That's not necessarily the issue I have. The issue I have right now is that we are starting to see a dangerous trend where our cash that should be available for operating is drying up. And so for the past 3 consecutive months, we've seen the treasurer need to dip into our bond proceeds in order to continue to operate government. And those levels have dropped to as low as $60 million.
And so what would you like to see her to do?
Well, I think what should now happen is the legislature, and certainly the executive branch, the governor's office, needs to ask why this is happening. Right now we have $700 million less than we had last year in the bank. And so we need to know why our cash flow is dipping so low. Is it that we're spending more than we projected in the budget, or are our revenues coming up short?
Can you talk a little bit about why this is happening now, and when was the last time this happened, these types of transfers, these interfund transfers?
Sure. As far as I know, the interfund transfers have only occurred on 2 other occasions, and that was back in 2003 when the stock market had crashed, and then again in 2008, I believe somewhere around that time, when again we saw a drop in the stock market. The reason why I think it's happening now, in part, is because we've depleted our savings account. Over the last couple of years, if people might recall, the rainy day fund, our savings account, was depleted in order to make up for the deficits that we have. So right now we're sort of taking money in and spending it at the same pace as it's coming in. So we're sort of just right at the zero mark.
Has she agreed to, I know that the Republican leader, Larry Cafaro, has asked for a meeting with her. Has she agreed to meet with you guys?
She has not yet. And I think what's important is that the legislature, especially the Finance and Appropriations Committee, needs to come together in a public forum to have some of these questions asked. When I first got in the legislature, we didn't even know that there was a common cash pool. It surprised some people. And so now that we have these reportings and we can see how our cash, our checkbook is performing, when it is this low, when it is hitting $60 million, and we're borrowing for 3 consecutive months, I think we need to get the treasurer in to answer questions on why.
But isn't answering questions of why and dealing with it, those are 2 different things, right? Absolutely.
But the checkbook balance is an indicator for how we're doing and where things are going. So if we see things are starting to get into the negative, our budget may be out of balance. So when you then look at Moody's downgrading us, you look at our Office of Fiscal Analysis saying, look, we're running a deficit, it may be as high as $234 million. You start saying, you know what, things might not be as good as the governor says. He continues to say we're going to end the year in the black, but when your checkbook balance is negative, it doesn't seem that that's what's going to happen come June.
But this transferring of money from the capital programs to the operational fund, that's not going to be reflected. That's not going to impact, like, Moody's.
It probably wouldn't. It's an acceptable practice. The treasurer's perfectly within her purview to manage the cash by making these transfers. But what will be reflected is that if we continue into the negative, eventually it's going to indicate that we're either spending too much and we're going to end the year in a deficit.
Was this about a little bit of the argument, some have said, is a little bit about semantics. It's, you used the word, the treasurer actually used the word too, of borrowing from one fund to another when there's actually no borrowing going on. So is this just a misunderstanding between the two branches of government here?
I don't think so. We sort of shifted the word from borrowing, which was used in her own documents up until January. Now we're using the word transfer. So you could call it a temporary transfer or a temporary borrowing. We're still talking about the same thing. But again, the reality is that our checkbook balance has dipped into the negative for 3 consecutive months.
So what sorts of questions, if she were to come and talk to you guys, I mean, what specifically are you going to ask her?
Well, I think what we first need to ask is how much are we borrowing each month? The one thing that the reports don't reflect is how far we are dipping down into the negatives. Is it 50 million? Is it 100 million? Is it 200 million? And then we could also ask the question of why. The Treasurer's Office does a projection of where our cash is. So they could sort of project out into the budget year of where the numbers are going to be. And it would be good to know, are you meeting those projections? Are we underperforming? In my conversations with the Treasurer's Office, the projections are off as much as 2%, which is about 200 million. So those are the type of questions we would need to ask, because when you get those answers, you can then see to the next point, and that being how our expenditures are doing. We've talked about how well our union concession savings are coming in, and there's been talk, where is the savings from the $180 million suggestion box? The comptroller just issued a report on the savings for the pension, and none of it's been substantiated yet. The auditors have said we can't certify those savings, and so that's what we really need to start attacking.
We had just a few seconds left, but the issue came up briefly in appropriations today, or?
The issue came up briefly in that if we did transition to GAP, which we have to pay off $1.75 billion, which Connecticut basically owes itself, then it wouldn't be having these cash flow issues, is what the governor's budget director said. So, if we did have a rainy day fund, we wouldn't have cash flow issues for the most part.
Right, right. Interesting. Well, it's a complicated issue, and we appreciate your articles on it and your taking time to come here and try and help us explain it today.
Sure.
Thanks to both of you for being here.